The quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek prided itself on its manicured lawns, freshly painted shutters, and spotless sidewalks. It was the kind of place realtors described as idyllic, a neighborhood where homeowners association newsletters were thicker than the local newspaper and lawn ornaments were monitored with the kind of seriousness usually reserved for federal law enforcement. For years, Willow Creek's HOA had enforced a long list of guidelines. Trash bins could only be visible on collection day. Grass must remain under 3 inches in length, and fences must all be painted the same bland shade of beige. Residents grumbled, but compliance kept property values high, and the HOA board, led by its president, Margaret Hensley, wore their authority like a badge of honor. As December approached, most neighbors prepared for Christmas with the usual touches: wreaths on doors, candles in windows, and a few strands of white lights tracing rooflines. But then came one house that decided to stretch the rules. At the end of Birchwood Lane stood the home of Daniel Harper, a tech-savvy father of 2 with a mischievous streak. For years, his holiday decorations have been modest: a plastic reindeer on the lawn, some colored bulbs strung across the porch. But that year, things changed. After hearing rumors that the HOA was debating new restrictions, Daniel felt compelled to make a statement. The official announcement came in the HOA's December newsletter, tucked neatly between reminders about snow shoveling ordinances and dues collection. A new rule: holiday decorations shall be limited to reasonable and tasteful displays. Excessive lighting, sound, or visual spectacles are prohibited to preserve neighborhood harmony. The wording was vague, intentionally so. But Margaret herself clarified in a smugly worded email blast that tasteful meant white or warm lights only, no inflatables larger than 3 feet, and certainly no flashing displays. She concluded her note with a pointed warning: failure to comply will result in fines and possible removal of decorations at the homeowner's expense. Most residents quietly obeyed, some even applauded the decision. But Daniel read the email with a slow smile spreading across his face. Tasteful, according to Margaret, meant conformity, and conformity to him meant surrender. He had no intention of surrendering. The following weekend, a plain white van arrived in front of Daniel's house. The logo painted on the side read, "Illumination Innovations, Professional Light Shows and Events." Out stepped a crew in work jackets, carrying ladders, wiring equipment, and a laptop case. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, whispering, curious. Daniel greeted the crew like old friends, shaking hands and pointing excitedly toward his roofline. By evening, the first hints of something unusual began to appear. Not just strings of lights, but grids of perfectly aligned LEDs. Not just wreaths, but speakers discreetly mounted on stakes. The crew worked late into the night, running cables into a weatherproof control box and syncing everything with a laptop. The neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Was it a wedding? A movie set? No one could tell, but Margaret watched with hawk-like intensity from her living room window. She told herself she was documenting violations. In truth, she was losing control of her carefully regulated kingdom. Finally, on December 10th, the lights came alive. At precisely 6 p.m., Daniel's house lit up like a cathedral of color. Rows of LEDs pulsed in flawless synchronization, swirling patterns rippling across the roof and walls. Candy cane stripes crawled up the siding, snowflakes danced across the lawn, and a glowing Christmas tree of light spun in dazzling spirals. Yet, strangely, the show was silent. No booming music, no jingling bells. Just waves of light cascading in rhythmic silence. Passers-by noticed small lawn signs placed at the curb. To hear the music, tune your car radio to 97.5 FM. That was when the brilliance of the plan became clear. Anyone parked outside could hear a perfectly synchronized playlist, holiday classics timed with every flicker of light, broadcast through a short-range FM transmitter. The neighborhood filled with cars, headlights blinking as drivers tuned in, jaws dropping in amazement. The HOA's rule had banned sound, but the street was silent, except for the hum of engines and occasional laughter from car windows. Daniel had found the loophole, and he had driven a glowing, glittering sleigh right through it. By the end of the first night, traffic backed up down Birchwood Lane. Children pressed their faces to car windows, adults filmed with their phones, and social media posts began to spread. Willow Creek, once a quiet suburban neighborhood, was suddenly the stage for the most spectacular holiday light show in town. Margaret, meanwhile, was furious. She fumed that Daniel's house looked like a Las Vegas casino dropped into a Christmas card. She fired off angry emails to the HOA board, demanding immediate fines and removal. But the board hesitated. The decorations weren't technically violating the written rule, and the spectacle had become an overnight sensation. Even some board members admitted they had driven by just to watch. What Margaret saw as anarchy, the public saw as brilliance. And what began as a neighborhood dispute was about to spiral far beyond Willow Creek's carefully manicured borders. The war had only just begun. The spectacle on Birchwood Lane grew night after night, swelling into something the neighborhood had never seen before. What began as a handful of cars idling at the curb quickly transformed into a nightly procession. By the end of the week, traffic stretched all the way to the main road. Families packed into minivans. Couples leaned against their hoods, sipping hot cocoa, and teenagers hung out of windows with phones recording the synchronized light show. Local Facebook groups lit up with chatter. Have you seen the Birchwood Lane house? It's better than the city's official display. You've got to go, but get there early or you'll be stuck in line. The videos went viral faster than Margaret could type her furious complaints. One clip, showing the lights dancing perfectly to a holiday classic, racked up tens of thousands of shares overnight. Soon, Willow Creek wasn't just a suburb, it was a destination. The neighborhood, however, was divided. Some residents enjoyed the sudden holiday fame. Kids squealed with excitement. Parents snapped family photos in front of the glowing display, and even businesses in the area benefited from the influx of visitors. Coffee shops sold out of peppermint mochas, and bakeries couldn't keep sugar cookies on the shelves. Others, however, seethed. They resented the honking horns, the bright lights flickering through their blinds late into the evening, and the endless stream of strangers crawling down their streets. And in their frustration, they found a leader in Margaret. Margaret saw the light show not just as a nuisance, but as a challenge to her authority. She called emergency HOA board meetings, waving her phone filled with angry text messages and grainy nighttime photos of traffic jams. She argued that Daniel was exploiting a loophole and making the entire neighborhood look tacky and chaotic. The board, however, was hesitant. They couldn't deny the show was technically within the written rules. There was no amplified sound blasting through the street, and the decorations, while elaborate, were still holiday-themed. Daniel had carefully sidestepped every word of their restrictions. If they tried to enforce fines, they risked looking unreasonable, maybe even legally vulnerable. That hesitation only enraged Margaret further. She began drafting complaint letters to the city, citing traffic hazards and light pollution. She marched down Birchwood Lane at night, clipboard in hand, taking down license plate numbers of cars parked too long. She snapped photos of children crossing the street to watch the display, muttering about safety violations. But for every angry complaint Margaret sent, Daniel's show grew more popular. The professional lighting company updated the sequence weekly, adding new songs and effects. One week, the house shimmered like a twinkling snow globe. The next, candy cane stripes wrapped around the entire structure, synchronized to booming orchestral crescendos, audible only to those tuned in on their car radios. Word spread beyond social media. Local newspapers ran headlines like "Suburban Home Rivals City Hall Holiday Display." A TV news crew arrived one Friday night, broadcasting live as hundreds of cars lined up to watch. Reporters praised the creativity, the clever use of silent broadcasting, and the joy it brought to families. And in every interview, when neighbors asked who was behind the show, Daniel's name was proudly mentioned. He was becoming something of a folk hero, the man who outsmarted the HOA's Grinch-like decree. Margaret's outrage turned into obsession. She scoured the HOA bylaws, looking for obscure clauses that could be twisted against Daniel. She considered arguing that the FM transmitter violated federal regulations. She even drafted a cease and desist letter accusing him of operating a commercial event without permits. But the more desperate her attempts, the more ridiculous she seemed. Her breaking point came the night a national news outlet picked up the story. The headline was brutal: HOA tries to ban holiday cheer, gets outshined by tech-savvy neighbor. The article painted Margaret and the board as villains, overbearing bureaucrats trying to crush joy during the holidays. The photos attached didn't help. A radiant, glowing house contrasted against quotes from neighbors praising the display and mocking the HOA's Grinch tactics. Suddenly, Margaret wasn't just dealing with her neighborhood. She was dealing with the internet. Comment sections exploded with ridicule. Strangers from across the country posted memes, photoshopping Margaret's name onto pictures of the Grinch and Scrooge. People began mailing candy canes and Christmas cards to the HOA office addressed to the real Grinch of Willow Creek. The board panicked. They begged Margaret to let it go, insisting the backlash was destroying their reputation. But she refused. To her, conceding meant admitting she had lost control. Meanwhile, Daniel watched the chaos unfold with quiet amusement. He had never intended for the show to blow up to this scale, but once it did, he leaned into it. He installed donation boxes at the edge of his lawn, with all proceeds going to a local children's hospital. What started as an act of rebellion turned into a charitable movement. Thousands of dollars poured in, further cementing his role as the holiday hero and making it even harder for the HOA to justify shutting him down. By mid-December, the situation reached a boiling point. Margaret had exhausted every bureaucratic tool in her arsenal. The board had lost confidence in her. The neighborhood was overrun with visitors, news crews, and holiday cheer she couldn't control. But Margaret wasn't done. If she couldn't win with rules, she would fight with desperation. And what she did next would push the neighborhood war to its breaking point. Margaret's frustration had grown into something unrecognizable. What had started as irritation over a neighbor's lights had twisted into a personal crusade. Each night she sat at her dining table, surrounded by binders of HOA bylaws, legal printouts, and hand-scribbled notes. The sound of honking horns outside fueled her obsession. Birchwood Lane wasn't hers anymore, not the way she liked it: tidy, orderly, and controlled. It had become a festival, and she was determined to end it. Her final plan was reckless. On December 19th, just days before Christmas Eve, she decided she would take matters into her own hands. She announced to the board that she was personally documenting violations for legal action. What she meant, however, was far more drastic. That evening, while cars lined the street and children squealed in delight at the shimmering spectacle, Margaret crept across the cul-de-sac in her heavy winter coat. She carried a flashlight, a clipboard, and, hidden beneath her scarf, a pair of wire cutters. Her idea was simple. If she cut power to the decorations, she could frame it as emergency safety enforcement. In her mind, she wasn't sabotaging, she was restoring order. She crouched near the side yard, fumbling with extension cords, muttering about nuisance ordinances. What she hadn't realized was that Daniel's setup was an amateur. The professional lighting crew had installed weatherproof equipment and tamper-proof locks on the power box. Instead of cutting the lights, she triggered a motion-activated camera. A bright floodlight clicked on, washing her in white glare. The crowd of cars noticed immediately. People rolled down windows, confused, watching as the HOA president stood frozen in the spotlight like a deer on a stage. A few children shouted, "It's the Grinch!" Phones flew into the air. Within seconds, she was being filmed from every angle. Margaret stumbled backward, waving her hands and insisting she was just inspecting. But the damage was done. The video hit social media within minutes, complete with captions like, "HOA caught trying to steal Christmas." The internet devoured it. Overnight, Margaret became infamous, her face plastered across viral posts and memes. The board had no choice but to act. At an emergency meeting, they voted to strip Margaret of her presidency, citing misconduct and embarrassment to the community. For a woman who had prided herself on control, it It was the ultimate humiliation. Neighbors whispered that she had brought it on herself, that she had let pride turn into obsession. Some even joked that the HOA bylaws needed an amendment about sabotage prevention. Daniel, meanwhile, stayed remarkably calm through the chaos. He didn't mock Margaret publicly, nor did he gloat about his victory. Instead, he let the light show do the talking. On December 24th, the final performance drew record crowds. News crews set up on the sidewalks, local officials attended, and donations to the children's hospital surpassed all expectations. That night, as the final song played, a soft, glowing sequence timed perfectly to the gentle flicker of candlelight patterns, neighbors noticed something remarkable. Daniel had added a new sequence just for the finale, a massive glowing heart that pulsed across the front of the house. At its base, spelled out in elegant golden light, were the words, "Merry Christmas, Willow Creek." Even those who had grumbled about the traffic couldn't help but be moved. Strangers clapped from car windows, children cheered, and some neighbors who had avoided the spectacle finally walked down the street to see it in person. For a moment, the neighborhood wasn't divided by rules or drama. It was united by a simple, shared joy. By the end of the season, the light show had raised thousands of dollars for charity, brought national attention to the small suburb, and cemented itself as a new tradition. Daniel announced he would keep it going every year, and volunteers even offered to help manage traffic and donations. What began as an act of defiance had become a source of pride for the entire community. Margaret, however, faded from the spotlight. She quietly resigned from the board altogether, claiming she needed more time for family. But everyone knew the truth. She had lost the war she started. The woman who once ruled Willow Creek with ironclad HOA newsletters now lived in the shadow of the very holiday spirit she tried to ban. And so, in the end, the Christmas light show war of Willow Creek became a story locals would retell every December. They'd laugh about the Grinch-like HOA president, marvel at the creativity of the homeowner who outsmarted the rules, and remember the year when holiday cheer defeated control. Because no matter how many bylaws you write, no matter how many rules you enforce, one truth remains unshakable. You can't outregulate Christmas spirit.